Ba-ba-ba-da. What's going on? Crew, how are we doing today on this fantastic Thursday? Cannot wait to dive into this topic today. But first, let me know who's here watching the replay with the hashtag replay, hashtag live if you're here live. Now, I would love to dive into this topic in depth, but we could spend hours here. We really could. So instead of going hours into the topic and covering everything, I'm going to dive into one specific piece, which is ultimately why the heck are my blood sugars going high? Why are they going low, right? And how do I fix that? Because, it's one thing to know why it's happening, but it's another thing entirely to fix it so it doesn't happen again. So that's what I want to look for in today's live is how can we tell what the heck is going on? And then, of course, how do we fix it? So give me a 1 in the comments if you can hear me. I want to make sure we do have audio. I'm going to double check on our visual real quick, and then we'll hop in to our topics for today. It is Thursday, right? Yeah. Okay. Make sure I'm here on the right day of the week. Looks like we do have visual, and I'm hoping we do have audio and everything else is set. So I'll hold the comments open. Feel free to say hi and let me know who's here and where you're from. Now, today's topic. And it's actually going to come from a conversation we had on our high-level coaching call for people who take insulin, i.e. the Cool Kids Club. For those of us who require insulin to survive, we actually have coaching programs, and I spend multiple hours per week diving into, blood sugars, CGM reports, insulin pump settings, lifestyles, habits, nutrition, exercise, all this fun stuff. And we get to really dig in to figure out how to make blood sugars more stable, how to keep things doing what you want them to do in the grand scheme of life while you're living on your terms, enjoying life and doing things you love with the people you love, right? And one of these topics came up, and it was an interesting question that we don't have to get into the question itself, but the statement that followed the question is really what piqued my curiosity. Now, this individual had mentioned that, different types of sugars were told to this person by their pharmacist that they have different absorption rates, right? How different types of snacks are going to raise your blood sugars at different speeds, which is good to know if you have a bad low blood sugar and you got to get out of that low, right? If you got double arrows down for anybody on a CGM at 60, you should probably get something that's fast and not go for a 3-egg omelet because, proteins and fats are not going to help with a low blood sugar in that moment. So looking at what is the fastest type of sugar that we can use in order to get out of a bad blood sugar. So in this case, we're talking about glucose tabs versus fruit versus natural honey versus, tons of different types of candies and Smarties and what's comparable, what's not. Great conversation. And this individual had also mentioned an interesting discovery they had, which was that caffeine can assist with blood sugar rises as well. And while that was true, and I was interested to hear about how the rest of that statement was going to pan out, my brain started thinking about correlation versus causation, right? And this incredible way to look at any kind of conversation, really. If somebody says, oh, this is happening because of this, first thing is that a correlation or is that a causation, right? Is that an actual yield from the journey, or is it something that's tied in but not directly, right? So saying that caffeine raises blood sugars, and then they proceeded to say that it was the caffeine from a soda. And I was like, yes, okay, I was on the right track. So they were correct in saying that the caffeine in that case was part of the blood sugar rise because it was tied to a soda. However, there are other pieces to that puzzle that were left undiscovered. We can look at the caffeine by itself. Does caffeine by itself raise blood sugars? Now that's an interesting question because the answer is maybe, or it depends, right? Some cases, yes, in some cases, no. And so with caffeine itself, one of the reasons that we see a blood sugar rise in some cases is actually because of a rise in cortisol as a response to the caffeine. Now, a rise in cortisol, a stress hormone, does lead into a blood sugar rise. However, it can vary on the intensity of the rise and also the timeline of the rise per individual. So while that is the first piece of that puzzle, now we can start by saying this is not going to affect everyone in the same way, so we cannot rely on caffeine by itself. Now we look at caffeine in this situation. Is that the reason the blood sugar is rising? So the reason, the story was that I have caffeine in the form of a Coke, Coca-Cola. That leads into a blood sugar rise. Therefore, I know caffeine helps with my blood sugar rising. Now, if we break that down, we just learned that sometimes caffeine does, sometimes caffeine doesn't raise blood sugars. It depends on the person. What do we also know about the Coca-Cola? The Coca-Cola itself, unless it was a Diet Coke, has a lot of sugar, right? So the next clarifying question that I should have asked, that I didn't, but I should have, was, is it a Diet Coke or a full sugar Coke? If it was Diet Coke, then yes, cut the experiment, it was the caffeine, right? Because there's no sugar in that example. So then we can isolate, okay, it's caffeine that was helping raise the blood sugars. Now, I believe, based on the description, that it was a full sugar Coca-Cola, which means that there is sugar in addition to the caffeine that is yielding a blood sugar rise. Now, what is a third component? And at some points, we got to stop asking, like, well, what else? What else? But that's the problem. But also the solution is that I never stop asking what else, right? Always asking what else enables us to be curious and learn more things. So what else could have led to a blood sugar rise? Why does Coca-Cola work so well? Is it the caffeine? Maybe. Is it the sugar? Also, probably yes. But what else? Now, what else turned into liquids? Liquids tend to affect blood sugars a lot faster than solids. And there's a number of reasons for that and a number of different rabbit holes we can dive into, looking at solids containing more fiber if you juice vegetables, right? But in this case, understanding that if you're trying to treat a low blood sugar, a liquid like a juice or a soda tends to impact blood sugars faster than a solid like a glucose tab. And there's a variety of different levels, right? You have the tabs, which is a semi-solid or a solid state, depending on the tab company. You've got glucose gels, you've got glucose liquids and shots and all the fun stuff. But in this case, looking at now, there are three variables that can lead to a blood sugar rise, right? We got the caffeine, we have the sugar, and we have the liquidity of this element, right? So instead of saying caffeine raises my blood sugars, we had to reframe it and say, oh, it's actually a combination of things, which makes it difficult to say that it was the caffeine that worked faster. It might have been the fact that it was a higher concentration of sugar or different ingredients in that sugar versus the other option they had been using, or my opinion, which was more likely than not, the liquid that made it absorb faster. So looking at this example, and we actually turned it into a great discussion. It was amazing to hear what my other clients had to say, and everybody had some thoughts on it. But looking at correlation versus causation with blood sugars, if I look at, let's pull it out of diabetes for a second, just to give you a different example entirely. If you've got a friend that is so frustrated about driving, right, they're driving their car and they say, gosh darn it, every time I go on the freeway, I get pulled over. It's like cops just want to pull me over every time I get on the freeway. And you're like, wow, that sucks, right? I'm sorry to hear that. If you didn't know them, if you had no context of that situation. But let's take that same friend after you've been riding with them a few times in their car to see what was going on, right? They say, yeah, come along with me on my journey. Every time, watch, I promise, every time I get on the freeway, I get pulled over by a cop. And then you hop in the car with them, they get on the freeway and they just hit the gas, right? They're going 110 miles an hour on the freeway. And you're thinking, of course, you're going to get pulled over. You're going 110. Not only are you speeding well beyond the speed limit, but you're also going to stand out when you're the one car that's zooming in and out of traffic at 110 miles an hour, right? And so they're thinking, well, no, it's the freeway is clearly the source of this issue leading into me getting pulled over by a cop. Like, do cops just hang out on the freeway? And you're like, with my outside perspective, I can actually tell you that it's not the freeway itself. It's your choice that when you get on the freeway, you go 110 miles an hour. And that is the true source of this situation. And then you can pull apart the situation even further with different variables and say, well, maybe there were cops that are set up on the freeway because they know people like you accelerate to an absurd degree when they are on the freeway, right? Or maybe your car looks oddly familiar to a different car that was just stolen and has never been found. And so every time they see your car, they hunt you down, right? There's always other variables you can ask and say, what else? What else could this be, right? In that attempt to find the proper attribution. And so when we look at our blood sugars, I really want you to just zoom out with me when you're looking at your blood sugars and look for the proper attribution. What is the reason that my blood sugar spiked? And I'll give you an example actually from today. Let's pull it up and see what we're at. Yeah, still a little bit high, but taking some extra insulin. So my blood sugars at lunchtime totally fine, right? And immediately after having lunch, I found my blood sugars rising to a less than ideal state, even in the middle of eating lunch. Now I had pre-bolused, I had counted my carbs, I had taken some insulin, I did everything right, and I didn't quite understand why my blood sugars were going up so high. And then, of course, after my meal, having to give extra insulin to bring down my higher blood sugar, I had to look back and say, okay, well, was it XYZ? Did I not count my carbs properly? And at first glance, it was, oh, well, I had a couple bites of my food before I should have. I took my insulin, I took a couple bites, and then I let the pre-bolus hit for the rest of the meal. Now, realistically, that should have only raised my blood sugars up 20, 30 points tops, right? A couple bites, a little bit of a rise, and it should have come right back down and smoothed out. I've seen that 100 times in my past, at least. Now, I didn't stop there, and that's why I'm going to be able to avoid this in the future. So instead of saying, okay, yep, that was totally it, I took a step back, and I was like, what else? Right? You got to ask yourself that question all the time. What else could it be? What else is leading into this higher blood sugar that feels stubborn, right? I've given extra insulin and it's not quite working just yet. What else could it be? And then it hit me. I realized hours before this, I had a high fat and high protein snack that I did not dose for. Crucial error, right? Now, looking back at that situation, I can identify the delayed rise hitting the exact same time that I introduced my lunchtime meal. So what I should have looked at instead is, how do I adjust my insulin dosing strategies based on previous snacks that I didn't dose for? Now, if you're asking yourself right now, why would you dose for proteins and fats? Well, that, my friends, is an entirely different topic that we just don't have time to get into today. If that's something that you're unaware of, please search this group. We've got a couple of trainings on that. We've got a masterclass on it as well. It's an entire topic that deserves attention. It will wreck your blood sugars if you're not ready for it. So fats and proteins. But looking back, I'm like, yeah, I should have adjusted my dosing strategies, right? Maybe add a little bit of extra insulin, made some adjustments, at the very least taking it into consideration so that I would have remembered. But the issue with proper attribution is that if you don't know, A, to ask what else, right? Or B, what to look for, you're never going to find your answers, right? And that's the tricky part. See, last week we talked about documenting, right? Write everything down. Crucial component. And if you're like, well, I don't want to, hate to break it to you, but it's too bad, right? And it doesn't have to be for your entire life. I'm saying document for a couple days. Very, very minimal commitment there. For a couple of days, write things down, and it could change your life for the better. It's worth it. Come on. But when we have the data in front of us, we still got to be looking for the proper attribution, right? Find the source of the issue. So if we're looking to attribute the spikes that we're seeing or the drops that we're seeing, we have to know what we're looking for or what things can impact blood sugars. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because most people aren't willing to put the work in, or maybe you are willing, but you don't have the knowledge or the resources or the time in order to acquire that knowledge, right? So instead, we got someone says the sound is cutting out, coming from Sandra. I hope that's not me, because I want everybody to be able to watch this. Real quick, let me know. Toss a I hear you in the comments if you can hear me okay, and if it's cutting out. Maybe it's just Sandra. If it's me, we'll have to make an adjustment. We'll pivot mid-live. Melinda says, for sure, I do better when I document. I love that. So real quick, say I can hear you or I cannot hear you if the audio is cutting in and out, or if you can hear me all right. Let me know. I hear you. Okay, cool. Sandra, I hope watching the replay is a bit clear for you, but I want to make sure that the video itself is. So jump back into Facebook afterwards. Maybe the internet will be stronger then. So someone remind me where I was. Where was I talking about? Proper attribution. I believe that's where we left off. So looking at proper attribution, documentation, right? Couple of days can give you some data points, but you have to know what it is that you're looking for so that when you ask yourself what else, you know what other things are options, right? So when I look back at my blood sugars, if I didn't know that fats and proteins impact blood sugars, I wouldn't know to isolate that, to assign value to that event, right? Years ago, I was told that fats and proteins don't do anything to blood sugars. That's what I was told by my medical team. And of course, now we know different, right? There's a lot of different components to blood sugars, a lot. And that's part of the struggle for most of us, is that we get overwhelmed, right? We think about all the different variables that can impact blood sugars, and we lack the ability to simplify it. Or I should say, we used to lack the ability. Now we have the ability to simplify it, but you got to surround yourself with the right people to learn those simplification processes, right? The methods to do so. Because within diabetes, if you don't know how to properly attribute the spikes and the drops, well, you're never going to know what caused it, which means you won't know how to prevent it or avoid it in the future. So first step, yes, document. That is huge. That's something that literally anyone can do. Yes, you can buy the Trending Health Journal, right? And for anyone who doesn't know, it's at trendinghealthjournal.com. But you don't have to. You can do what I did before I wrote that book. And I wrote it on the back of receipts and on napkins and on my hand in some cases and in my phone notes. It was a mess, but it works, right? There's free options to do this. There's no excuses. You can do this. That's the first step for anyone trying to get control. Document, document, document. Take good notes. All right. Now, the second step is once you have that data, once you've written it down, well, how do I properly attribute the origination of those spikes, of those drops, so that I can avoid them, right? And then step 3, we'll get into this one maybe next week, but once you have the documentation or the data, you have the proper attribution, you learn how to analyze and then predict where blood sugars are going to go in the future, right? So you can look at your blood sugars at lunch and go, oh, okay, I expect X, Y, Z to happen. Therefore, I'm going to take this insulin or remove this insulin or eat this snack so I don't go low when I'm working, right? Whatever that strategy looks like. And that's where we teach you how with blood sugar formulas, and that whole thing is all about that third phase, right? But second phase, proper attribution. The first step to proper attribution in asking what else could it be, right, is curiosity. You got to be curious about your blood sugars, know what the heck's going on. It starts with asking yourself questions or asking other people questions, right, where you can actually ask experts, doctors, coaches, other diabetics in some cases, though I would argue that oftentimes talking to other diabetics, you're going to get some bias mixed in with their advice, but it's still helpful, still better than nothing in most cases. Just be careful who you're receiving information from, as there might be a little bit of uncertainty with that information. Now, with all of the attribution that you're going to be seeking, understand there's like 50 plus variables that impact blood sugars. It used to be a list of 42. We know there's an excess of that nowadays. We've even added a few of those to our lists inside of our programs. Our clients are like, what about this one? And I'm like, yep, that causes blood sugars to move. Add it to the list, right? So getting curious, understanding there is a bigger world out there with blood sugars, and we have to learn about them. Unfortunately, as it turns out, this is one of the few diseases where you actually have to put on your scientist hat and go do the research yourself, because not only is the research constantly changing, but there's very few people that have medical teams or experts that surround them that are going to help them on this journey. In most cases, we're kind of on our own in this battle, right? Which is exactly why this group exists, right? Why we have this community of warriors, of renegade warriors, for my crew who's in here. But looking at, how do you gain this knowledge? Step 1, read a ton of books, cross-reference the books, and see which pieces of information remain consistent across all of them, all the different pieces of advice. I'll show you guys the third right there. The third bookshelf is all diabetes books. There's like 50 of them there. I've read most of them, not all of them, still working my way through, but all of them have their own outlook, their own rules that you should follow with diabetes. The key, though, is finding which of the rules are consistent across all of the books, or at least the majority. That way, there's a good chance that bias has been removed if it is a consistent scientific fact, right? So reading a ton of books, compiling them, and cross-referencing is one option. Another option, going down the deep, dark hole of Google and WebMD and trying to figure out which information is true, which information is purely clickbait, and navigating that route on your own. Of course, option 3, looking at the community or other people in your circles that understand diabetes on a lived experience kind of level. That's going to be helpful. But then the final level really is either finding a medical team, like a full built out team that is knowledgeable, but also understands life with diabetes. Like it's really a diamond in the rough if you can find a doctor that also has type 1. It's pretty cool, but also pretty rare. But the other option there is to either hire a consultant, a coach, or an expert to help you along this journey and just give you the shortcuts, right? Somebody who has the answers already and just looks into your profiles and says, oh, it's XYZ. These are the proper attributions, right? This is the source of your highs, your lows. In fact, I actually just got off of a 15-minute call with somebody from this group that in 15 minutes, we identified what was the source of their problems. And I'm pretty positive that we're going to see a 15 to 20% boost in their time in range over the next couple of days from this one tweak. And that's the benefit of perspective, getting somebody else who knows what they're doing to look in, identify what's happening, give you that shortcut that you can use and then see better results, right? Same thing with that person driving the car on the freeway. You know, they think that every time they go on the freeway, the cop pulls them over. So freeways are evil, right? And you're like, no, it's because you're driving 110 miles an hour. That's like a diabetic looking at carbs and saying, oof, every time I eat carbs, I spike super high. Therefore, carbs are evil. And then somebody from the outside perspective, like myself, comes in and I'm like, no. Carbs aren't evil. You just don't have the right dosing strategy for it. Or maybe there's an activity error beforehand. Or maybe it's the type of carbs that you're eating. Or maybe it's the glycemic pairing that we could switch, right? There's so many different options to make it work. But you won't know that until you know that. And that's the biggest gap in knowledge of all time, is that you don't know what you don't know, which is why you go to an expert and get the shortcuts built out for you, right? That's the key. This is why I hire mentors every year, like multiple mentors, to help me find the shortcuts in business, in relationships, in my health. I actually just hired someone to help me with my health, right? And get things a bit more dialed in so that I feel my optimal self and really get to live a long, healthy life with full mobility and function. This is where you find the shortcuts, right? So this one's getting kind of long. It's turning into a bit of a rant. I wanted to share that with you guys, though. The big key here, step number 2, is proper attribution. All right. So last week, documentation. You don't have to do it for your whole life. Document a couple of days, gather the data. Once you have the data, you analyze it, you interpret it, and you find the attribution. What's the source of the highs, of the lows? Am I misinterpreting? You know, am I saying carbs are evil because I spike after carbs? Or is it possible that I'm not pre-bolusing? Is it possible that I'm super stressed out in that meal and that's causing a spike, right? Similarly with the discussion we had with my client, right, where they had mentioned caffeine helps them avoid low blood sugars. Well, was it caffeine? Was it the fact that it was sugary drink because it was a soda? Was it the fact that it was a drink and was a liquid, which absorbs faster, right? There's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle. So we have to learn proper attribution so that we can make the changes necessary to then avoid the spikes, the drops, and keep blood sugar stable more consistently. So who's this? Suzanne says, I always feel encouraged and more confident after hearing you, Matt. I love that. Melinda says, good stuff. Amazing. And you know what? If this has been helpful, just go ahead and smash the like button real quick, or like the emojis. Let people know they should come watch this. This is something I want people to understand, is how to look back and assign an attribution, right? If we can do that, then it's step 1, step 2, and then we'll get into step 3 next week. We'll talk more about how to predict blood sugars, the pieces of the puzzle that I assign to my blood sugars to keep them more stable. Talk about how yesterday I worked in an attic in 100 degrees in physical labor for like 4 hours straight and kept my blood sugars perfectly stable the whole time. There is a strategy to this. It's not luck. It is not that my diabetes is any easier. My diabetes is difficult. I've been told, well, we'll just say that the word brittle has been brought up in the past, and I refused to accept that as my norm. There's ways to do this. I promise you that. And you know what? We'll go ahead and just do this real quick too. I mentioned the 15-minute call that I had with somebody, and in 15 minutes, I was able to identify the source and help make some tweaks so that now, like I said, a couple of days go by, guarantee they're going to see a huge boost in time and range. That's possible. And if you have someone who knows what they're talking about and can isolate it like that, it can happen with you as well. There is no, oh, I can't get help. I'm unhelpable. It's not true. Everybody can get help, and I want you for that. Okay. Here we go. Suzanne said, I was told brittle, not today, not so. Love it. So if you want to hop on a 15-minute call, I've got some slots on my calendar. And what we can do is, of course, look for places to isolate variables, see where the proper attribution might lie. But I would love to see who I can help on here, even if it's just a quick fix, right? It might not fix all of your diabetes, but even fixing a small portion can make a massive difference for time and range, A1C, quality of life. So like I said, I got a couple times on my calendar that are available. And if you want to use that time to talk about working together for a longer term, we can absolutely talk about that. No pressure, though. I want to make sure that if you want to work with us, that we can help in the first place. But like I said, let's see how we can make some small tweaks, assign proper attribution to our blood sugar spikes and drops. That's going to enable us to what? Avoid them in the future. And that is the big goal. Document, assign attribution, and then next week, we're going to get into a few pieces as well, all right, on how to predict blood sugar. So what we'll do then, if you want to hop on my calendar real quick, just go ahead and type the word coach, and I'll get you more info on that. I'll shoot you a message and be like, hey, what's going on? We'll have a quick chat about your current situation. I'll get you a link to my calendar, and we'll jam. All right. So go ahead, smash that like button so people know come watch this one so they can learn about step 2. And then we'll jump into step 3 next week. Looking super, super forward to it. Yeah. Outside of that, you guys are awesome. Thanks for hanging out. Drop the word coach if you want more info on just a quick chat, and we'll see if we can get the attribution rolling for you. All right. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next week. Thursday is at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll catch you then, and have an amazing rest of your week. Keep up the fight. Bye.